Hi everyone, welcome back. So in this video, I just want to quickly give you an introduction into administrative units in Azure AD. So administrative units are nothing but a container to hold other Azure AD resources, and it can contain only users and groups in it. And if an organization wants to restrict the administrative scope, uh, they can create administrative units and they can add users and groups in those units. Let's say, for example, there is a university and they have autonomous schools like School of Business, School of Engineering, and so on and so forth. So in such cases, if university they want to kind of restrict the administrative scope uh, to those units or divisions, they can go ahead and create administrative units for School of Business, School of Engineering, and a separate IT admin user can be assigned onto this particular unit, right? So who can create those administrative units? So only global administrator or privileged role administrator can create this administrative unit. When it comes to license requirements, using administrative units requires an Azure AD P1 or P2 license for the uh, administrative units administrators. In this case, IT administrators for different units under this university in our example, and at least Azure AD free license for the members in the administrative units itself. Okay. Uh, and when it comes to assigning the Azure AD roles with administrative unit scope for the administrators, so let me quickly jump on to Azure portal. So let me move on to Azure Active Directory. We go on to users. So if I can scroll, okay. So right now I've logged in as user SM Academy at the rate of Sheikh Mohammed.in. If I go to that user, click on that user, go on to assigned roles, the left blade. So you can see here, this particular user has been assigned a user administrator role, and if you can see the resource type, it's administrative unit scope, right? So if I can go back and look other user, say let me take on another user. So as you can see here, this user is a global admin, and if you can see the resource type, it's at the organization level. Okay, in my Azure portal, so let me jump over to Azure Active Directory. So in the left blade, just scroll down and click on administrative units. So what I already did is I created as a global admin with another account. I have already created an administrative unit, which is a School of Business administrative unit, and I have assigned this user SM Academy at the rate of Sheikh Mohammed.in user as a user administrator within the administrative scope. Okay, so let me click on School of Business administrative unit, and if you can see, there are a couple of users that has been already added by global admin. Okay, because as a user administrator within the administrative unit scope, I cannot go ahead and add or delete users, okay, in this administrative unit. So I have a couple of users here already added. Okay, and if I click on groups, I have a test GRP group that's already assigned. Again, I cannot go ahead and add group or remove group within this administrative unit itself. So okay, if I jump over to Microsoft documentation for the list of roles that can actually be assigned with administrative unit scope. Here you can see the list of roles like authentication administrator, groups administrator, and so on and so forth. And these roles shouldn't be confused with the Azure AD roles that can be assigned with the organization scope level, right? So what do I mean by that, right? If I jump over to Azure AD built-in roles and password reset permissions section, so you can see here uh, the column headings are like, the roles that can reset the passwords, and the table rows that can contains the roles for which the password can be reset. So for example, a user admin can actually go ahead and reset the passwords for other admins as well. This is at the organization scope level. So here you can see a note. This table is only for the roles assigned at the scope of a tenant itself. So for roles assigned at the scope of administrative unit, so further restrictions apply. Okay, so if I jump over to Azure portal, so let me check the different roles that has been assigned to the members in the administrative unit itself. So before that, let me go back to users in Azure Active Directory. So the current logged on user, SM Academy user, I click on that user and click on assign roles. So I can see that this user has been assigned a user administrator role within the administrative unit scope. Okay, let me close this. Let me come back to administrative units section. Here I can see this user, SM Academy user, has permissions to control or administer the School of Business administrative unit itself. So let me click on School of Business administrative unit, and here I have a couple of users added. Okay, one is sample user at the rate of Sheikh Mohammed.in, and one is the test user. So let's check the roles assigned to these users itself. I click on sample user, I go to assigned roles. So this user doesn't have any roles assigned to this particular user, right? So if I go back to the test user, I click on assigned roles. So this user has been assigned a password administrator role at the tenant level, at the organization scope level, right? Let me close this. We also have a group added to this administrative unit. I can click on that test GRP group, go to members. I can see there is a user added in this group. I can check the role assigned to this user. There are no roles assigned to this user. Okay, so there are some constraints in administrative unit. So if I jump over to the presentation, so what are all those constraints for administrative units? Administrative units can't be nested. Okay, and administrative unit scope, user account administrators can't create or delete users, so that we already checked, that I've shown you. So if I go to administrative units, I can't go ahead and create or delete users. Okay, if I jump over to users section in Azure Active Directory, so these are grayed out. I cannot create a new user, okay, or even if I cannot delete a user. Okay, so let me jump over the presentation. So, and also a scope role assignment doesn't apply to members of groups added to an administrative unit unless the group members are directly added to the administrative unit itself. So what does that mean? So if I can see here in the administrative unit, I have a couple of users. We have already checked the assigned roles for these users, and there is one group already added to the administrative unit. So there is one constraint. So as a user administrator within the administrative scope, in this case School of Business Administrative Unit scope, this user can only manage the users added directly into the administrative units, and he can manage the group memberships, but cannot manage the users in the group itself. So what do I mean by that? So if I go to test GRP group, I can see a member here. So let's try and reset a password for the user within this test GRP group. Okay, so for this user, let me try and reset the password. So I cannot. So I get a message saying that the password cannot be reset. This may be due to an incorrect level of administrative privilege. Okay, so let me try and see if I can reset a password for the users added in the administrative unit. If I go back to users, so I have a couple of users, right? Let me try and see if I can create reset the password for sample user who doesn't have any roles assigned to himself, right? If I try and reset the password, yes, I'll be able to do it for this user. I can go ahead and reset the password as a SM Academy user who is the user administrator within the scope of administrative unit. And one more thing I just wanted to show you. So we have seen that this user, test user, if I can quickly check one more time, the assigned role for this test user. This user is a password administrator, right? So let's see if we can reset the password for this user who is already a password administrator, right? So let me click on this user. Let me try and see if I can reset the password. No, I cannot reset the password who is already an administrator, right? So that's one of the constraint in the administrative unit. So if I can jump over to the list of roles that can be assigned within the administrative unit scope, right? So here you can see that. Let me zoom a bit. So certain role permissions apply only to non-administrator users when assigned within the scope of an administrative unit, not at the tenant level. So in other words, an administrative unit scoped help desk administrator, right? So can reset the password for user in the administrative unit only if those users do not have administrator roles. So that's exactly what we checked just now in Azure portal. So this user, test user, has been assigned a password administrator role. So as a user administrator within the administrative unit scope, I cannot go ahead and reset the password for other administrators itself. That's one of the constraint. So if we allow that, that would be a huge security danger, right? So this user, this test user, could be managing passwords for other users who's not a part of this administrative unit itself. So that's why there are some constraints, right? So as we already checked, so these are roles that can be assigned within the administrative unit scope. And if you can check the Microsoft documentation, you can clearly see that as a user administrator or a password administrator, they can reset the passwords for non-admins only. Okay. If I can jump over to Azure portal, we close this. close this. So in this video, we quickly looked at what Azure AD administrative unit is, and we looked at the roles that can be assigned to the administrators uh, who is managing the administrative unit itself. And we also saw some of the constraints for administrative units, like the administrative unit scope. User account administrators cannot create or delete users, and a scoped role assignment doesn't apply to the members of the groups added to an administrative unit. And we also saw that an administrative unit scope administrators cannot uh, try and reset a password for other administrators, right? So thank you so much for watching. So hope you find this useful, and please like, share and subscribe to the channel and get notified on future videos as well. Thank you.